Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would absolutely love that. You can do that for as little as $1 or even possibly less. Just pop along to patreon.com/the History Network to become a patron of the podcast there. Every little helps, and we really do appreciate every one of our patrons. Thank you so much. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 33, episode 5, The Battle of Montgisard. This episode was written by Murray Dahm. If you've been with us for a while now, you will know that Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and the recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is our regular writer on this podcast and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast also. The Battle of Montgisard, fought near Ramla in central Israel, saw the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem unexpectedly defeat the forces of Saladin. The Latins were vastly outnumbered and fought thinking that they faced certain defeat. Their victory put an end to the inexorable advances that the Muslim conqueror Saladin had won up to that point. We are fortunate to have several sources for the battle from both Christian and Muslim perspectives. We may even have eyewitnesses in the form of William of Tyre, the King of Jerusalem's biographer, and Arabic sources who interviewed Saladin. Founded at the conclusion of the First Crusade in 1099, the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was always in a precarious position. It was surrounded by Muslim enemies and suffered from a lack of resources and support from its Christian allies, both in Europe and the Byzantine Empire. The rise of Saladin in Egypt and Syria in the 1170s was also a threat which could not be ignored. Saladin rose to power as a vizier of Fatimid Egypt. He then abolished the Fatimid Caliphate in 1171, eventually replacing it with his own Ayyubid dynasty. He campaigned in Syria, taking Damascus, Hama, and Homs to expand his empire. From his earliest military appointments in Egypt, Saladin had been at war with the Crusader states and the Byzantine Empire. In 1174, the new king of Jerusalem was the 14-year-old Baldwin IV. He had already been diagnosed with leprosy, and so this was a crisis in itself. For the first 2 years of his reign, he ruled under a regent, Count Raymond III of Tripoli, but Baldwin proved himself vigorous, capable, and courageous. An amphibious invasion of Egypt was planned for 1177. In June, the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos provided galleys to sail from Acre with a force of crusaders. Troops would be supplied from the King of Jerusalem, Tripoli, and the religious orders of the Knights Templar and Hospitaller. The Count of Flanders, Philip I, Baldwin's cousin, was also embarking on a crusade to the Holy Land to take part in the expedition. He landed in August and unexpectedly refused to embark for Egypt or to take the offered regency of Jerusalem. Instead, Philip decided to accompany Raymond of Tripoli's expedition to attack the Muslim stronghold of Hama, also called Harim, in northern Syria. The Hospitallers, a large number of Templars, and 100 knights from Jerusalem went with them. This left the Kingdom of Jerusalem with very few troops to defend its various territories. Saladin was informed of the expedition and lost no time in organising a raid of his own. William of Tyre, in his Deeds Done Beyond the Sea, tells us that Saladin assembled troops in great numbers from all sources, and caused them to be equipped even better than usual with arms and all manner of things commonly used in warfare. Then with his army he marched out of Egypt. This vague account is supplemented later by William telling us that he had made careful investigation, suggesting he was present at least in the aftermath, and that he found that 26,000 light-armed cavalry, in addition to others mounted on camels and beasts of burden, had entered our territory. Of these, 8,000 belonged to those splendid soldiers called, in their own language, Toasin. The other 8,000 were the common knights, known as Carnajols. These were the Torwashi heavy cavalry and the Quaragulamis light cavalry horse archers. These numbers, however, are suspect and may include servants. Each warrior could be accompanied by up to 100 servants, some of whom must have fought. Another source, Al-Makrizi's Kitat, claims that there were only 12,000 cavalry in Saladin's invasion. Another source claims 12,000 cavalry and 9,000 Arabs. William also tells us that there were 1,000 of the most valiant knights who acted as a bodyguard to Saladin. All these wore yellow silk over their breastplates, the colour that Saladin himself bore. Saladin marched to Al-Arish and left his heavy baggage there. His raid was going to be rapid, and he intended to plunder the countryside for what he did not bring with him. Saladin crossed into the Latin kingdom on 18th of November and advanced rapidly north towards Gaza. Baldwin had learnt of Saladin's invasion and had hurriedly mustered the forces still left in the kingdom. Their numbers, including all ranks and conditions, were barely 375. This is a very low number of defenders, but reinforces the idea that Baldwin's army was vastly outnumbered. Estimates for Baldwin's foot troops range from 3,000 to 4,000. Saladin bypassed Gaza, although a garrison of all available Knights Templar had been summoned there to dissuade him from attacking it. William of Tyre tells us that there were only 80 Templars, revealing just how denuded of troops the kingdom of Jerusalem was. It seems most likely that the Templars went to Gaza to prevent harassment of the city, rather than they were there in strength already, and that they later joined Baldwin, rather than that there were other Templars available. Saladin advanced on Ascalon, but Baldwin's troops were already there, and the king had rushed to the city with his hastily mustered army to reach it before Saladin. Baldwin drew up his forces outside Ascalon, but did not offer battle, despite some single combats taking place between the two sides. This gave Saladin confidence that Baldwin would not meet him in open battle, and so the following day he sent contingents of his forces out to ravage the countryside. One of Saladin's commanders burned Ramla and surrounded Lida. Learning of these activities, Baldwin determined to fight and summoned the Templars from Gaza. William of Tyre summarizes that Baldwin immediately directed all his forces, both cavalry and infantry, in all their martial array against him. He was joined by the brethren of the Knights Templars who had remained at Gaza, and together, with ranks in battle formation, they prepared to meet the foe. From there, it is probable that Baldwin's forces shadowed Saladin's march, although other modern historians suggest he marched north and then swung inland so as not to be detected by Saladin. The army probably marched to Ibelin. Balian of Ibelin was with the army, and it made a good staging point. It is also difficult to reconcile the distances and possible locations of the battle with a march from Ascalon. The following day, scouts from Ibelin located Saladin crossing a valley. We are told that the Muslim forces had trouble with their baggage crossing a river there. This could have been plunder, since the heavy baggage had been left behind at Al-Arish. The entire Latin army was led out, most probably with Reynald leading it into battle rather than Baldwin. William of Tyre's account of the deployment of Baldwin's forces does not at first glance seem particularly useful. They nonetheless drew up their forces in battle array and arranged their lines according to military rules, disposing in proper order those who were to make the first attack and the reserves who were to come to their aid. We can use this account, however, to summarise that he probably deployed them in the standard array of 3 divisions or battles, and that the knights were in front with the infantry behind. Some modern accounts of the battle cannot accept the low numbers provided by William of Tyre, suggest that Baldwin had 500 Knights Templar present in addition to 500 knights of his own. William of Tyre provides the number of only 80 Templars, and since he seems to have been present at the battle, his low number is to be preferred. This would have given Baldwin 450 knights in total, a very small number indeed, but one which accords with the idea that Saladin attacked when Baldwin had been weakened by the number of men sent north. It also reinforces just how desperate Baldwin's situation was. If we accept the low numbers for the Kingdom of Jerusalem's forces, this would mean each battle formation had 150 knights and between 1,000 to 1,300 infantry. Saladin was caught completely by surprise. Since Baldwin had not offered battle at Ascalon, it was understandable that he would think himself safe. He was mistaken. Saladin's men blew trumpets and banged drums, attempting to recall the men sent away, either foraging or to plunder the locality. We also hear of men fetching armour and weapons from the baggage train, reinforcing just how surprised Saladin was as Baldwin's army advanced. William of Tyre's account of the battle itself is brief. The ranks of fighters on both sides now gradually approached each other, and a battle ensued which was at first indecisive, but the forces were very unequal. The Christians, however, strengthened by the grace shed upon them from on high, soon began to press on with ever-increasing boldness. Saladin's lines were broken, and after a terrible slaughter were forced to flee. Bahā al-Din's The Rare and Excellent History of Saladin also offers us an account of the battle. We are told there that it was Reynald who commanded the Franks, not Baldwin, and this would make more sense since he was the senior commander present, and the leprous Baldwin usually had to be carried by litter and had a lame right arm, so the idea of him leading the army is romantic but misplaced. At the same time, it is understandable that Baldwin's biographer William would make him the centre of his account. The Arabic accounts give us more detail of the battle. What is more, Bahā al-Din tells us that he learnt his information from an interview with Saladin himself. The history of Saladin has: the Muslims had drawn up for battle, and when the enemy approached, some of our men decided that the right wing should cross to the left, and the left cross towards the centre, in order that when the battle was joined, they might have their backs to the hill known as Ramla land. While they were occupied in this manoeuvre, the Franks charged them, and God decreed their defeat. This tactical error marries with the defeat by the Franks of a superior force, but in William all credit is given to their faith. It is possible that this description gives us an idea that Saladin drew up his forces with a hill behind them and with a left and right wing, perhaps slightly forward of the centre, but when the Frank attack came, they were not yet in their new positions. Muslim tactics to blunt the charge of Frankish knights were usually to give way at the point of the charge and then surround the enemy, but both William of Tyre and the Arabic sources tell us that Saladin's horses were overtired and had not rested. The usual tactic could not, therefore, be undertaken, and a heavy defeat followed. Having been caught and bested, Saladin's forces broke and fled. His Mamluk bodyguard then charged, and their sacrifice allowed Saladin himself to escape. One late source tells us that he swapped his horse for a racing camel. We find even more information in another Arabic account, Imad al-Din's biography of Saladin al-Bakr al-Shami. It tells us of Saladin's nephew, Taqi al-Din, in the front lines, and we get corroboration of his position from other Arabic sources. Taqi al-Din's son, Ahmad, died charging the Franks. The defeat was a disaster for Saladin. His forces were pursued for 12 miles, according to William, being slaughtered as they fled. Thereafter, Saladin's forces made their way back to Egypt piecemeal. They suffered great privations and casualties crossing the Sinai. It is estimated that Saladin lost 90% of his forces. Modern accounts of the battle estimate that the Latins lost 1,100 dead and 750 wounded. William of Tyre, however, states that, "At the very beginning of the engagement we lost 4 or 5 knights and some foot soldiers, but the exact number of these is not known." Such a low casualty number accords with a slaughter of a surprised enemy, whereas the higher numbers would represent almost 50% casualties for the Latins, not a decisive victory at all. The modern reconstructions do, however, have higher troop numbers. Saladin was humbled and needed to regroup after Montgisard. The kingdom of Jerusalem had gained a respite, but it was only that. In 1187, Saladin would invade again and impose a decisive defeat on the kingdom at the Horns of Hattin, and followed up with the capture of Jerusalem itself. Well, thanks once again, Murray, for writing another great episode for us. If you would like to have a go at writing an episode, then please do drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org, and let us know your idea. Or if you don't fancy writing a script for us, then perhaps you've got an idea for us to cover as a podcast. If so, again, it's info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. Just let us know what you'd like us to cover and we'll look into it. And once again, please do go along to patreon.com/thehistorynetwork and pledge whatever you can to become a patron of the podcast, even if it is just a few cents. Your pledge only gets taken if and when we produce each new episode. So it's not like a monthly subscription where you pay anyway, whether we produce something or not. So do go along and check that out. Thank you once again to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Well, thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.